Long before the cameras, before the panels, before anyone knew his name, Simon Cowell walked into a nightclub and met Sinitta. The music's loud, people moving around them, and somehow they're locked into that one moment. A few years later, in 1985, he signed her to his record label and helped launch her career. With hits like So Macho and Toy Boy that people still remember today. And somewhere, in between the music, the momentum, and everything becoming more public, they fell into something that never quite settled. Hot and cold. Walking away, then somehow finding their way back again. According to Sinitta, that cycle ran on and off for 40 years. That's 4 decades. Let that sit for a second. 40 years. Not a relationship that ended. One that just kept coming back. And now, sitting in a South African jungle on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, she's talking about it more openly than she ever has. Not as a neat story with a beginning and an end, but as something that never had clear edges. She said Simon was the first person she was ever truly in love with. And the pattern was simple. Someone hot would catch his eye, he'd pull away, she'd end it, and eventually they'd find their way back to each other. Over and over. For decades. She describes it now as an unspoken understanding between them, that over time, it turned out to be a misunderstanding on her side. She thought patience meant something. That when he said, "Everything you want is coming," meant a life together. She believed they'd end up married. As she put it herself, without bitterness, silly me. And this wasn't some private, behind closed doors relationship. It played out in front of millions. When Simon became one of the most watched figures on British television, Sinitta became his go-to companion during X Factor judges' houses from 2004 through 2013. 9 years of standing beside him on primetime television when he decided which artist to back. If you watched the X Factor, what you couldn't see was what that actually meant, or how complicated the relationship really was behind the scenes. But it wasn't as simple as a one-sided infatuation. This is how she described it in the celebrity camp. He wasn't a faithful boyfriend.
He wasn't a faithful boyfriend.
That's her line, said plainly. And she even added that Simon wouldn't mind her saying it, because he knows it's true. She was possessive too, she admits that, and he liked that about her. But he also said women would act wild around him everywhere they went. At one point, she described being burned on the shoulder by a lit cigarette while dancing in a club because a woman pushed through the crowd trying to get to him. That's what it felt like standing next to Simon Cowell in those years. And still, despite everything, she stayed connected to him. She still believed they were building toward something. She told the I'm a Celebrity camp that she feels like Simon loves her and cares about her, genuinely, not as a performance. But she also thinks she romanticized it, seeing what she wanted to see rather than what was actually there. She doesn't put the blame on him. She includes herself in it too. Then, something that neither of them spoke about publicly for years. Back in the 1980s, Sinitta became pregnant with Simon's baby and had an abortion. She described it as heartbreaking and devastating for both of them. She said he was by her side throughout, concerned and present, and that they went through it together. It's one of those details that shows the depth of what they actually shared. And then, life moved forward, as it tends to do, and the relationship slipped back into what it always was. On, off, then back again. But there's something that explains why they could never quite land in the same place. Sinitta had always known that she wanted children. She's spoken about how her relationship with her mother shaped that. How she wanted to recreate that bond and give a child the same kind of love that she grew up with. Motherhood was never negotiable for her. And Simon, at that stage, saw things very differently. As Sinitta described it, his view was simple. If you have the baby, you won't be the baby. He liked being the center of her world. A child would change that. And that difference ran deeper than just timing. It sat at the core of what they actually needed from that relationship. Meanwhile, Sinitta was living her own life between the chapters she shared with Simon Cowell. She even dated Brad Pitt. Yes, that Brad Pitt. It was from 1986 to 1988, before Thelma and Louise made him one of the most recognizable faces in the world. She said if she closes her eyes, she can still go back there. And yet, even with Brad Pitt in the picture, Simon was still the unfinished sentence. She'd been clear about that. She explained how she approached other relationships during those years, saying, if he's done that, I'll date Brad Pitt. I'll date this model. But always with the underlying sense that she and Simon would eventually sort themselves out. Moving on, but never really letting go. And then, in 2002, she got married. And she's since been very honest about what that decision was built on. Sinitta has called her marriage to Andy Wilner a revenge move. Not said with bitterness, just said honestly. The marriage grew into something real over time. Andy was a good man. She's made that clear. They adopted 2 children together, Magdalena and Zach, and built a real family. But even during that marriage, she admits the pool was still there. There was still unfinished business with Simon. Looking back, she said therapy helped her understand why she clung to him, even while being in other relationships. Apart from my mother, he was the most constant person in my life. When I'm on tour and becoming famous and all of that, there was still him everywhere, or him at the end of the phone. So I think I had found a sort of security in that person. And that kind of connection didn't just disappear. Even when everything else in her life moved forward, what came next was difficult. Sinitta went through with 3 miscarriages. Then she and Andy arranged a surrogate who became pregnant with twins. But that pregnancy ended in miscarriage too. 5 attempts at the family she had always wanted, counting the pregnancy with Simon in the 80s. 5 losses at different stages in her life, and in different ways. And still, that connection hadn't gone anywhere. Eventually, she and Andy adopted Magdalena and Zach. And for a while, life felt like it had finally settled. They had their children, a home they'd built together. She said it felt like everything was okay, like she could finally exhale. Then, her husband wanted to move to Hong Kong. She couldn't do it. She needed to stay in her home, with her babies, in the life they had already built, not dismantle it for a relocation that she didn't want. And that's where something underneath finally surfaced. As she put it, doing life without really doing it together. They were in the same place emotionally, but pulling toward different futures. And that was the end of it. But even then, Simon was still there in the background, and the question she'd been carrying for decades still had no clear answer. Until 2013. After all those years, all the back and forth, she finally saw it clearly. And what she realized was simple. She had been holding on to something that was never going to turn into a life with him. In 2013, Simon got together with Lauren Silverman. She became pregnant with his son, Eric Cowell. Sinitta has been clear about this. For her, things were never truly over between her and Simon until that moment. Not emotionally, not in her mind, but that pregnancy was the full stop on 40 years of going back and forth. She once said on the Suddenly Single podcast, "I assumed everything I wanted meant a normal family life with him. And then he met the love of his life and had a child. Silly me." Simon called her himself to tell her. She said she was stunned, that he sounded calm, but in a strange way that unsettled her. She described a mix of emotions all hitting at once. She even posted a tweet shortly after. Something has just happened. Half miracle, half nightmare. Hashtag wake me up, I want to get off. She later said it wasn't necessarily about the pregnancy, but the timing, and people drew their own conclusions. What she did next is the part that really surprises people. Simon asked her to be the godmother to baby Eric, and she said yes. He later became godfather to her adopted children in return. Just picture that for a second. The woman who spent 4 decades going back and forth with him, who carried a pregnancy with him in the 80s, who once believed she'd be his wife, is now the godmother to his child with somebody else. And somehow, that's not just something that exists behind the scenes. They've been photographed together at Royal Ascot. All 3 of them, Simon, Lauren, and Sinitta, standing side by side in the sun. You can see that as something genuinely beautiful, or something quietly difficult to take in. It probably sits somewhere in between. Staying close to Lauren, actually building a friendship with her, gave Sinitta something that she hadn't had before. Watching Simon with Lauren and Eric, she said for the first time she understood it clearly. She told the camp in South Africa, everyone really does have their proper person. She was the right person for a time, but what Simon and Lauren have is a level that she and Simon never quite reached together. She even questions her own role in it now, saying at the camp she was probably too needy. She believed it was going to be her happy ending, but then it wasn't. And somehow, after all these years, she finally sounds at peace with that now. Simon proposed to Lauren on Christmas Eve in 2021 in front of Eric and Lauren's son Adam. The man Sinitta once described as someone who thought he'd never grow up and definitely never get married, had done both. When she talked about it in camp, she smiled and said, "He's a big boy now." After 8 years happily single, Sinitta eventually joined dating apps, had a few disasters, and then found someone she describes as a lovely, normal person who makes her laugh. Not her usual type, someone different. And maybe that's the point. 40 years. A career he helped build, a pregnancy kept private for decades, a marriage she admits started for the wrong reasons, a public friendship with the woman who got the love and life she once imagined. And through it all, 2 people who remain genuinely connected, not for cameras, but for their bond never quite fit into a simple category. Simon Cowell was the man who'd never commit. Sinitta believed that version was temporary, that her patience would be enough, that timing would click. Then, Eric arrived, and everything became clear. It showed her that what she'd been waiting for was never going to unfold the way she thought. She gets that now, and saw it for what it was, not rejection, but the arrival of something they'd never have together. That's the truth Sinitta shared with the world from a South African jungle. Not with anger, not for attention, just because she's lived enough to be at peace with it now. Now in her 60s, she found someone who makes her laugh, and yet she's still part of Simon's life, just in a different way than she once thought. Maybe that's what it really comes down to. Maybe sometimes you spend years thinking something is unfinished, until you realize it just took a different shape. And that's the truth she finally understood.